I remember the exact moment I decided to go to the craft store. It was a Tuesday morning, early, before the light had even finished climbing over the rooftops of my neighborhood. I had $63 in my checking account and rent was due in 11 days. I stood in the kitchen drinking coffee that had gone cold, doing the math in my head the way I always did, the way a man does when he has more month than money. My granddaughter Claire was turning 22 that Saturday. There would be a party. Of course, there would be a party. I had been told about it 3 weeks earlier, not by Claire herself, but by my son-in-law Gerald, who called me on a Wednesday evening with the kind of voice people use when they are being polite instead of kind. "We're having a little gathering for Claire's birthday, Raymond," he said. "You're welcome to come. Welcome to come." Like I was a neighbor he felt obligated to include. Not her grandfather. And not the man who taught her to ride a bike in the parking lot of the Baptist church on Sycamore Street when she was 5 years old. I said I would be there. I thought about what I could give her. 22 is a real birthday, the kind that means something. She had just finished her second year of law school up in Boston. And her mother, my daughter Patricia, had already bought her a leather briefcase that cost $400. I knew because Patricia mentioned it twice on the phone, each time with a casualness that was clearly not casual at all. Gerald had arranged for a weekend trip to Nantucket with her friends. The other grandparents, Gerald's parents from Connecticut, had sent a check for $500. I knew that too. Word travels. The place's word dollar. I walked through the craft store slowly, the way I do most things now that my hip has settled into its permanent complaint. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just knew I wanted it to come from my hands. I found a small wooden keepsake box, unfinished, the kind you paint yourself. It was $7.99. I stood there, in the aisle, holding it for a long time, and a woman with a cart full of foam and ribbon moved around me without a word. I turned the box over in my hands. The wood was smooth, light. It felt like something that could hold something important, if you let it. I bought the box, a small set of acrylic paints, and a fine-tipped brush. The total came to $18.43. I counted out exact change at the register because I did not want to break my last 20. I spent 3 evenings painting that box. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be, but I took my time. I painted the outside a deep navy blue, Claire's favorite color since she was about 7 and refused to wear anything else. On the lid I painted a small Scales of Justice emblem. Simple, the kind a child might draw, but careful, deliberate. Around the edges I painted tiny white stars. Inside the lid I wrote in the steadiest hand I could manage. 2. For the lawyer who will change the world. Love always, Grandpa Ray. I filled the box with a letter. 12 pages, front and back, written on yellow legal pad paper because I thought she might appreciate the symbolism one day. I had been writing that letter for 2 years, adding to it in pieces, late at night when the apartment was quiet and the old feelings had nowhere else to go. I wrote about her mother when she was young. I wrote about the year everything fell apart, the year I almost lost everything, the year nobody in the family talks about. And I wrote the one thing I had never told anyone, the truth that only I knew. The truth I had been carrying like a stone in my chest for 24 years. I tied the box with a piece of twine I found in my kitchen drawer and put it in a paper gift bag with some tissue paper I'd saved from Christmas. The party was at Gerald and Patricia's house in Westfield, a kind of suburb where the driveways are long and the lawns look like they're afraid to grow a single weed. I parked on the street because the driveway was full of cars I didn't recognize, sleek and new, the kind with backup cameras and heated seats. I sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the house, all those lit windows, the sound of music, drifting out even from where I was parked. I smoothed down my shirt. It was the blue Oxford I wore to church and to every important occasion I could remember. I had ironed it twice. The party was bigger than a gathering. There were maybe 40 people in that house, spilling out onto the back patio where someone had strung up Edison lights and put out trays of food I didn't recognize. Young people everywhere. Claire's law school friends, Patricia's book club, Gerald's colleagues. There was a bartender, an actual hired bartender, standing behind a folding table with bottles arranged like a small skyline. Claire saw me from across the living room. She was wearing a dress the color of champagne and she looked beautiful, grown up in a way that still surprised me every time I saw her, even though I had watched every inch of that growing happen. She came over and hugged me, and for a moment she was 7 again in my arms. "Grandpa Ray, you made it," she said, and she smiled, and the smile was real. "Wouldn't miss it for anything," I said. I handed her the paper bag. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She took it with both hands and set it on the gift table without looking inside, the way you do at parties when you're being pulled in every direction and someone is already calling your name from across the room. "I'll open everything later," she said, patting my arm. "Get some food. Make yourself comfortable." I nodded. I told myself that was fine. That was how parties work. I spent the next hour on the periphery. I talked to Gerald's father, Martin, for about 10 minutes, about the stock market, a subject I know nothing about. I ate a small plate of things I couldn't identify, but that tasted expensive. I watched my granddaughter move through the room like she owned it, laughing, animated, full of a confidence that I'd always hoped she would find. I felt proud. I also felt the particular loneliness of being proud from a great distance. The gift opening started around 8. Someone gathered everyone around the living room and Claire sat in the center of the couch like a queen holding court, which she was, and which she deserved to be. The gifts were impressive. A beautiful leather briefcase, which Patricia presented with a kiss on each cheek, an envelope from Martin and Diane containing what I could only assume was a check with many zeros, a spa package, a silk scarf from France, a set of sterling silver earrings in a blue velvet box. Then one of Claire's friends, a sharp-looking young woman named Becca, picked up my paper bag from the table. She handed it over with a small puzzled expression, the way people look at something they've already categorized. Claire reached inside and pulled out the little navy box. There was a silence, not a long one, but the kind that has texture. "Oh," said Becca, and the word carried a whole sentence inside it. Someone else I didn't see who made a small sound that wasn't quite laughter and wasn't quite not. Claire turned the box over in her hands. She read the inscription on the lid. Her face was careful, controlled, the face she had learned to wear in a world that watched her. "Thanks, Grandpa." She said, and her voice was warm enough, but it had a layer of something underneath it, a careful, managed warmth, the kind that keeps the cold from showing through. She set the box aside, not in the pile of opened gifts to admire. Aside, on the end table, behind a vase, half hidden. Becca leaned over and whispered something to the friend beside her. Both of them smiled. I was close enough to hear. "I wish I hadn't been. Did he paint that himself?" Becca murmured. "Looks like it," the friend whispered back, and they smiled the way young people smile when they think no one who matters is listening. I looked at my granddaughter. She did not correct them. She did not say anything. She was already reaching for the next gift, already moving forward, already part of the room in a way I understood I was not. I stayed another 30 minutes because leaving sooner would have felt like a declaration. I said goodbye to Gerald, who shook my hand firmly and thanked me for coming. I hugged Claire, who hugged me back and told me to drive safe, and I said I would. I walked to my truck on the street, got in, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel. I was 63 years old. I had driven 40 minutes to bring my granddaughter a painted box that cost less than a movie ticket, and I had sat in a room full of people who pitied me for it. I drove home. The apartment was quiet the way it always is. I hung up my good shirt, made a cup of tea, I didn't drink, and sat down in the armchair by the window. I thought about the letter inside that box. Inside that box, 12 pages on yellow legal pad paper. I thought about what I'd written on page 9, the part about her mother, the part about the year everything went wrong, the part about the secret. I thought about whether she would ever open it. I thought about whether she would read it if she did. I had carried this particular truth for 24 years, and I had put it on paper and given it to a 22-year-old girl who had just set it behind a vase at her birthday party. I told myself I had done the right thing. I told myself the truth finds its way, even when you hand it to someone in a paper bag. I didn't entirely believe myself, but I held on to it because I didn't have anything else to hold on to that night. I went to bed at 9:30 and stared at the ceiling until well past midnight. My phone rang at 1:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock the way you do when a phone rings in the night, when your heart goes cold before you even answer. The name on the screen was Claire. I answered before the second ring finished. Grandpa Ray. Her voice was not the voice from the party. It was something stripped down, something raw, something I hadn't heard from her since she was 9 years old, and she called me crying because her parents were fighting again and she was scared. Grandpa Ray, are you awake? Can I come over? I know it's late. I know it's so late. I'm so sorry. Can I please come over? Claire, I said, where are you right now? I'm in my car. In the driveway. I read the letter. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, come right now. She drove 40 minutes in the middle of the night and knocked on my door at 2 in the morning. When I opened it, she was still in her party dress, a cardigan thrown over her shoulders, her eyes red and swollen in a way that told me she had been crying for most of the drive. She was holding the box, both hands pressed against her chest like it was something she was afraid to drop. Come inside, I said. She sat down on my couch and I made tea she also probably wouldn't drink. And I sat in my armchair across from her and we looked at each other for a long moment. She had the letter in her lap, the yellow pages folded and folded again. Grandpa Ray, she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. You wrote that my mom. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. Tried again. You wrote that mom almost gave me up. I was quiet. I nodded. You wrote that when she was 23 and she just found out she was pregnant and dad had just left her the first time. That summer before they got back together. You wrote that she called you, that she said she couldn't do it, that she was going to. She couldn't finish the sentence. She looked down at the pages in her lap. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees. She was 23 years old. I said, she was alone. She was scared. Your father had left and she had $30 in her bank account, and she called me from a payphone because her cell phone had been shut off. Ah, Claire looked up at me. I drove to her that night, I said. It took me 4 hours. This was before the highway was finished out there, so it was back roads most of the way. Well, I got there at 2 in the morning. She was sitting on the steps of her apartment building with a garbage bag of clothes next to her because the heat in her apartment had been off for 2 weeks and she was planning to go to a shelter. I paused. I could still see it, clearer than most things I'd seen in the last decade. I put her and that garbage bag in my truck and I brought her home. She lived with me for 7 months, Claire. And until your father came back and got his head straight and they found that apartment in Linden. Claire was crying quietly. The kind of crying that doesn't have sound yet, just tears running steadily down her face. She made me promise never to tell you, I said. She made me promise before you were born. She said she was ashamed and she didn't want you to know how close it had come. How close she had been to a different choice. She wanted you to think she had always been sure. But you told me, Claire whispered. Why now? Why did you put it in a letter and give it to me at my birthday party? I thought carefully about how to answer that. I had thought about this question for 2 years, ever since I started writing that letter. Because you're 22, I said. Because you're about to go out into the world and argue for people who don't have anyone else to argue for them. Because you're going to sit across from people who have made desperate choices and been judged for it their whole lives. And I needed you to know before you do that work that your own mother once stood at the edge of a desperate choice. And that someone drove 4 hours in the middle of the night and didn't let her fall. Claire pressed her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. I'm not telling you to change how you see your mother, I said. She was 23 and she was terrified and she turned her life around. She raised you. She did the hard thing. And I am proud of her every single day. I leaned forward a little more. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that the people who need you most aren't going to show up looking like they have it together. They're going to show up looking like they made every wrong choice. And I want you to know what it feels like to love someone through that. She looked at me for a long time. The party makeup was gone now, washed away by the crying, and she looked younger without it, closer to the girl I remembered. There's more in the letter, she said quietly. You wrote about you. About the year you didn't, the year you almost. She stopped again. The year you almost. The year you almost. The year I almost didn't make it, I said. It was the first time I had said those words out loud to another person. She nodded. I sat back. I looked at my hands. 19 years ago, I went through a stretch of time that I don't talk about. Your grandmother had been gone for 2 years, and your mother and your father were in a hard place in their marriage, and you were 3 years old, and I felt like a man who had become invisible, like the world had moved on and hadn't told me. I went to some dark places, Claire. I'm not going to dress it up. I was in a very dark place for about 8 months. She was perfectly still. What brought me back, I said, was a Tuesday morning in February. You were 3 years old. Your mother brought you over because she needed a few hours to herself. And I was sitting in this same apartment feeling like there was no point to any of it, and you came in through that door. And you walked right across the room and you climbed up into this armchair. I gestured to the chair I was sitting in, and you put your head on my arm and you said, "Grandpa Ray, tell me a story." Just like that, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Like there was no question I would be there. Claire covered her face with both hands. "I never told anyone," I said, "because it seemed too big to say and too small to explain. But I put it in the letter because I needed you to know that you saved my life on a Tuesday morning when you were 3 years old, and you did it without knowing, and I have spent the last 19 years trying to be worthy of that." She got up from the couch and crossed the room, and she sat on the arm of my chair and put her arms around my neck the way she used to when she was small and I was the tallest thing in her world. I held on to her. She was shaking. "The box," she finally said, pulling back a little, wiping her eyes. "Grandpa, you made it yourself." "I did. I set it behind a vase." Her voice broke. "I set it behind a vase at my own party because I was embarrassed. Because Becca said something and I didn't want to look." She stopped. I was so cruel. I didn't even say anything. I just let her say it. "You were at a party," I said, "and you were 22 and you wanted to belong. I know something about wanting to belong. You were at a party. That's not an excuse." "No," I said, "it isn't. But it is a reason. And understanding the reason is how you don't do it again." She held the box in her hands and opened the lid. She read the inscription again. "For the lawyer who will change the world. Love always, Grandpa Ray." She ran her finger over the little painted scales and the white stars around the edge. "You painted this." "3 evenings," I said. "My hands aren't what they used to be." She looked at me. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has given me in years." And I could hear that she meant it, not as a kindness to me, but as an actual truth she had only just understood. "I've gotten a lot of expensive things," she said slowly, as if she were working something out as she spoke. "A lot of things that people buy because they don't know what else to do. But this, you sat down and you painted this and you thought about every part of it. The color, the stars, the inscription. You thought about me." "One, I always think about you," I said. We talked until 4 in the morning. She told me things she had never told me about the pressure she felt in law school, the constant measuring of herself against everyone around her, the way she had gotten very good at performing confidence she didn't always feel. She told me about a professor who had told her she didn't have the instincts for trial work, and how she had cried in a bathroom stall for 20 minutes before deciding he was wrong. She talked about her parents, her mother's expectations, the way Patricia needed everything to look a certain way to the world. She talked about Gerald, who was not a bad man but who had taught her without meaning to that worth was something you displayed. I listened. I told her that instincts are not something you are born with. They are something you earn, one hard case at a time. The problemation, I told her I had known she was going to argue with the world since she was 4 years old, and she stood in my kitchen and made a very convincing case for why she should be allowed to eat ice cream before dinner. She laughed at that, a real laugh, sudden and bright. Before she left, she hugged me for a long time in the doorway. The night was cool and quiet outside, no sound except the distant hum of the highway. "Mom doesn't know I know," she said. "No," I said. "I'm going to talk to her." She paused. "Not to be angry. I don't think I'm angry. I think I want to know her differently. The real version, not the version where everything was always fine." Sigh. "That's the right way to do it," I said. "Were you scared to tell me? To write it all down and just hand it to me like that?" "I thought about it. Terrified," I said. "But you're a lawyer. I figured you'd know what to do with the truth." She laughed again, quieter this time. She kissed my cheek. She held the box against her chest, the same way she'd been holding it when she arrived, like something she was afraid to put down. "I'm going to keep this on my desk," she said, "when I pass the bar, when I'm sitting across from someone who needs me to believe in them when nobody else does. I'm going to look at it." Good, I said. I watched her walk to her car. I watched her back out of my street. I stood in the doorway until the taillights disappeared. I went inside and sat down in my armchair. The apartment was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one I'd come home to earlier. It was the quiet of something that had been resolved, something that had been carried for a long time and had finally, carefully, been set down. I thought about the $18.43 I had spent. I thought about the 3 evenings with a small brush and a set of paints. I thought about 12 pages of yellow legal pad paper and 24 years of a truth I had held close because I had promised to, and then released because the right moment had finally arrived. The gift table at that party had been full of things that cost money. Beautiful things, useful things, things that would be used and appreciated and eventually forgotten. The leather briefcase would hold briefs and motions and marked-up depositions. The sterling earrings would be worn to important occasions and eventually lost or saved in a drawer. The check would be spent on things that needed to be paid for. The box would sit on her desk, and every time she looked at it she would remember the conversation we had at 4 in the morning. She would remember that her mother was once 23 and terrified and that someone drove 4 hours and didn't let her fall. She would remember that her grandfather sat in this same armchair one February morning and a 3-year-old girl climbed up and put her head on his arm and asked for a story and didn't know she was saving his life. She would take all of that into every room where someone needed her to believe in them. That is not something you can put a price on. That is not something you can order online and have delivered in 2 days. You cannot wrap it in a box from a designer store and put a bow on top. You can only paint it, by hand, on a Tuesday evening, with unsteady hands and a fine-tipped brush, and trust that the person you love will one day hold it close enough to understand what it's really made of. She called me the next morning. She had talked to her mother. Patricia had cried, the real kind, the kind Patricia almost never allowed herself in front of anyone. They had talked for 2 hours. Claire said it was the first honest conversation she could remember having with her mother in years. She said Patricia had asked her not to be angry with me for telling. Claire had told her there was nothing to be angry about, that some truths need a messenger, and some messengers wait a long time for the right moment. I think that is the smartest thing anyone has ever said to me, and she learned to say things like that by being who she already was, long before any law school got hold of her. The box with the navy paint and the tiny scales and the white stars sits on her desk in Boston now. She sent me a photograph. There it is, in the corner of a serious desk covered in serious books. This small handmade thing that cost less than a cup of coffee at the kind of place her classmates go every morning. It is the first thing she sees when she sits down to work. I am 63 years old and I have a lot of years behind me that didn't go the way I planned. I have a hip that complains in cold weather and a checking account that keeps me humble and an apartment that is small and quiet in the way that apartments become small and quiet when the people who used to fill them have built their own lives elsewhere. I have a daughter who loves me and a son-in-law who tolerates me and a granddaughter who called me at 1:17 in the morning from a driveway 40 minutes away because she had just read something I wrote and needed to come over. I would not trade any of it. Not one single cold cup of tea. Not one single sleepless night. Not $1 of that $18.43. Because what I have learned, and it took me 63 years and 3 evenings with a small brush to learn it, is that love is not measured in the price of what you give. It is measured in the attention you bring to the giving. It is measured in the truth you are willing to finally tell. It is measured in the 4-hour drive you make in the middle of the night and the armchair you keep empty because you always want there to be a place for someone to sit. It is measured in whether you show up. And I have always shown up.